If you've listened to this podcast for more than 5 minutes, you already know my nervous system lives on the edge. That's why I love Rise. Between being a mom, a teacher, and a full time researcher of all things sinister and spooky, I need energy that doesn't come with anxiety. My therapist says I have plenty of that already, which is why I love to start my day with Rise. Rise is a mushroom coffee blend that gives me focus without the jitters, and it actually helps me quiet my ADHD brain. It lifts my brain fog and somehow even made my gut health way better. We love a multitasking beverage. I usually drink it in the morning before I sit down to research or record, and it helps me stay clear headed instead of wired. I like to add a little cacao powder, a sprinkle of cinnamon, and of course, my favorite creamer. Then suddenly, it's a delightful little cup of emotional stability. Rise isn't just coffee, it's gut health and nutrition that your body actually craves. With lion's mane, cordyceps, reishi, shiitake, and turkey tail, you'll be saying, "Holy shiitake, I can actually focus," because these mushrooms help maintain focus throughout the day. They help maintain your stress levels, and they even boost immunity while clearing up that pesky brain fog. So if you're trying to kick your caffeine habit or you just want something that's genuinely better for your nervous system, head to the link in the show notes and use my code Suspects and Spirits Podcast 15 to get 15% off your first purchase. What have you got to lose? Again, that's Suspects and Spirits Podcast 15 to get 15% off your first purchase. Your lizard brain will thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is Suspects and Spirits, and I'm your host, Taylor Seraphin. It is officially summer break, and it is also the 1-year anniversary for this little baby podcast that could. I made it an entire year, you guys. I didn't miss a single episode, not a single one. On top of, momming, teaching, traveling, sicknesses, all the things that life just loves to throw at us. I didn't miss an episode. I missed like a total of maybe 3 TikToks out of the entire year. But I mean, life happens. And you know what? That's just for promo. That's for promo, anyways. I mean, the TikToks are fun. They are. Don't get me wrong. But it's more to like promote the episodes, get people intrigued, get my name out there. And I've come to realize that sometimes I just like can't control things that happen in my life, except for, like going to the Hayley Williams concert. But I am not in control. So I apologize for not being able to get this past TikTok out. I had some medical stuff going on. And then on top of just like end of year madness, daughter graduating 8th grade, all of that, I was like, I can't do it. But you know what? I still get the episodes out for you guys. The actual podcast is weekly. It is consistent and that rocks. I did have a few like Booze Clues stories that were maybe a day late throughout the year, but hey, that's not too bad. Not too bad considering this is a one-woman show up in here. So happy 1 year to us, Ghouligans, True Crime Coven. I could not do this without you all. Thank you so much for listening and for putting up with me as I learn and grow. I'm still doing that, still very much learning and growing, always am. But just wanted to take a minute to appreciate that you all are still here and that I've made it an entire year and consistently have been putting out episodes on schedule. I read that like 90% of indie podcasts don't even get past episode 3. And honestly, I can see why. This is not an easy thing to keep up with, especially when you have a whole life and a job and kids and whatnot. So, I mean, it's even harder when you don't have anyone doing it with you to like split the workload, you know? But we're here. 1 year, y'all. I did it. And I would love to continue as long as possible if you guys aren't sick of me yet. That being said, since this is such a special episode to honor the 1 year anniversary of Suspects and Spirits, I am doing one of my absolute favorite paranormal stories today. This has been a longtime favorite of mine and a long time coming. I honestly don't even know if I need my notes for this one today because I know it so well. But this isn't just my favorite haunting. This is arguably America's most famous haunting. And it even has a presidential cameo, which is wild. Today, we are going to be covering the Bell Witch. Now, if you've heard this story before, stick around. Stick around anyways. It's a great story. You might learn something you haven't in, previous coverings of it. If you're new here though, make sure to hit that subscribe button because this is the kind of shit we do over here all the time. And by we, I mean me. So if you're spooky and you like weird things and history and true crime, you'll love this podcast. Quick side note though, before we begin, I realized in my research, because I did a little bit of research to see if there was anything I didn't know about this story because I want to be accurate. And a lot of people who have covered this story don't really discuss some of the, I guess you could call it controversial parts. I don't know. I don't think slavery is controversial. I don't think there's another side to that coin. I think it's just gross. I think it's disgusting. And I don't know why people tend to skip over that part of this story because it's a pretty prevalent part. This is the 1800s in America. So unfortunately, this is something that is discussed in the story and we can't just like leave it out to make everyone comfortable because that's not factual. And then aside from that awful mess, there's also the allegations in this case that we will get into toward the end. Now, I say allegations because this all happened in the 1800s, and Betsy Bell has never, from what I have read at least, confirmed the allegations. So even if you know the story, maybe you don't know those parts. And if you don't know the story, oh baby, you are in for a wild ride. So let's dive in. This is one of the oldest recorded hauntings in America's history, and it all began in the 1800s in what is now known as Adams, Tennessee. So, John Bell and his wife Lucy Bell were originally from North Carolina, but they moved to Tennessee in the early 1800s with their 5 children. And then they ended up having 3 more when they settled in Red River, Tennessee, which is, like I said, now Adams, Tennessee. So those other kiddos came along around the year 1804. And now John and Lucy Bell were parents of 9, yes, 9 children. That's a lot of kids. So there was Jesse, Drury. I feel like that's so hard to say. Drury, John Jr., who I will refer to as Lil John just because it's more fun. Yeah, yeah. And then there is Zadok, Esther, Elizabeth, who goes by Betsy, Benjamin, who unfortunately died very young, Richard Williams, who went by Williams, and then last but not least, there's Joel Egbert, who went by Joe. So lots of names, lots of kids. But if you know anything about this story, you know that out of all of those children, all of the people, this story really focuses on one in particular, and that is Betsy. But before we get into what happened to poor Betsy, we need to look at the history of the land that the Bells eventually settled on because, like many of these stories go, and without a doubt in my mind, Red River at the time was said to be cursed because, like a lot of settlements then, it was built on Native American ground, kind of like our whole country. Now, despite this, the family was actually pretty well off for a time being. John Bell, the father, was well known in the community and he did very well for his family. He was really well respected, and as was his wife, Lucy, and all of the Bell children. Although they had moved onto this cursed ground, they really didn't experience anything weird until the year 1817. And this haunting in particular lasted for over 4 years. And it is now referred to as one of America's greatest ghost stories. So, this is where our story really begins. To set the scene for you, the Bell family lived on a very large 320-acre farm where they built and maintained a beautiful, famous log cabin. And all of this started with sightings of very strange animals on the land. The family would see ridiculously large dogs, like big black dogs that were not actually dogs, which is honestly very Appalachia of this territory. And allegedly, John Bell Sr. saw one that had the body of a dog, but the head of a rabbit, which to me immediately makes me think of like SW stories, that kind of stuff, shape shifting, things like that. That's just what I think of. But of course, that might not be the case. But regardless, I think we can all agree that is not something you see every day. So he was a little concerned at this sighting. And then that's not the only thing that they saw. And he is not the only person who saw something bizarre. because one of the sons said that he saw what he thought was a turkey at first. And we all know that turkeys are pretty large. But then as he looked closer, he realized it was actually much too large to be a turkey. And they never determined what kind of bird it was. It was just some huge, strange, foul creature. Now, the family is originally from North Carolina, which, like, not that far. But maybe they thought that the animals are just built different here. Maybe they just eat weird stuff. So they get really big and they have bunny dog bodies. They mate with each other. I don't know. But when they moved here, they were like, this is some weird shit. Like, these are some weird animals. What the hell's going on? This land is very different. So eventually they would tell each other, about what they had seen. And they all agreed that it was really bizarre, but nothing had concerned them too much yet. Now, me personally, if I saw a dog with the head of a bunny, I would be a little concerned. I probably wouldn't want to live there. But they were just like, weird. and, and they continued on with their day. But then the animals weren't the strangest things that were happening, because at night when they were sleeping, they would wake up to what sounded like tapping or banging noises on the outside of the house. And I don't like that one bit. That is a big nope on a rope from me. But they kind of just like chalked it up to somebody pranking them. They were like, "Oh, these damn kids, are playing pranks," even though they lived on this giant ass farm. Like 320 acres is huge. I don't know who would be pranking them out there, but that's what they chalked it up to, because no one wants to believe your house is haunted, right? And this tapping did not relent. It didn't stop. It actually elevated. It became worse, and it led to sounds inside of the house. And one of the primary noises that the family would hear was described as gnawing or like nibbling on the bedposts. It sounded like an animal had gotten into the house and was chewing away at their beds. But then they would look all around the house in the daytime and they wouldn't see any signs of an animal, like no mice, no rats, nothing that was chewing. And even stranger, there was no evidence of any gnawing on the bed. So there was a sound, but there was no evidence on the bedposts. Super bizarre. And then things suddenly took a very, very dark turn when their youngest daughter, Betsy, started having some very, very concerning behavior and interactions with an unseen force. Poor little Betsy would start screaming in the middle of the night, and her parents would run in to check on her, and they would find her cheeks bright red and swollen with handprints on them, like she was being slapped in the face or punched. And she would tell them, "I've been slapped. Somebody hit me in the middle of the night." And her poor little face was just so red. And by this point, the family would wake up to loud, shattering noises, noises that sounded like chains dragging across the floor or like glass shattering. And then everyone in the house was experiencing their covers being ripped off in the middle of the night, and their pillows would be thrown to the ground. They also experienced the house shaking. And I don't mean like like an earthquake. I mean the house itself would start to violently shake. Like there was some kind of earthquake going on, but only in their house. And they couldn't really like turn to friends or any family. They didn't have any family in the area. They didn't have any friends that they could be like, "Hey, all this weird shit's going on in my house." They didn't really discuss like private family matters. So they tried to keep this to themselves as much as possible. Everyone just kind of like minded their own business, unlike in the 1600s with the Salem witch trials. And, no one knew how to mind their own fucking business. But this one, they were like, let's keep this to ourselves. And for an entire year, this kept going on. And none of the kids in the house were allowed to tell their friends what was happening. And then John and Lucy wouldn't talk about it either. They were just very, very private people. Now, eventually, enough was enough. And they realized if they were going to figure out what was happening, they were going to need some help. And it was going to take a lot more than Jesus and holy water to fix what was going on. So they reached out to a friend of theirs named James Johnston. He was a neighbor that the family was pretty close to and someone that Lucy and John like really truly trusted. So James and his wife decided that they were going to spend the night and figure out, what was happening at the Bell House, to see if maybe this, when strangers were around, the activity would just kind of settle down. But it did not. In fact, the spirit was very upset that there were guests in the home. So James and his wife are now experiencing what the Bell family experienced. He's hearing the banging, the tapping, the gnawing on the bed, all of it. So James told John that he wanted to help and he was going to try to put together like a group of investigators to hopefully get rid of this entity for the family. But very, very quickly after that, word had spread around the town and people were just kind of showing up to the house to see what it was all about, which is not cool. You can't just like show up to somebody's house to see if it's haunted. But regardless, they ended up having an open door policy so that people could come and see this haunting for themselves. And the family didn't ask for money because they really didn't need it. They were doing very, very well for themselves. So they just let people come as they pleased. And I think at this point, they were just like so desperate for people to believe them and for this to stop that they were just letting anybody into the home that wanted to come see it because they were desperate for answers. So people would come over to the house and they would all gather around, usually in the kitchen, and they would try to communicate with who or whatever was responsible for these noises. And this is where it starts to really interact with people because they would start to ask questions. And the answers would be given through taps or scratches on the wall. Over time, though, the taps and scratches turned to moans and groans, like human noises. And then it became a low, almost like a growl, and then a low whistle. And that whistle became a whisper. And finally, it ended up becoming a voice, a clear as day feminine voice. So the first night that this happened, the first night that the spirit spoke, there were about 24 people sitting in the kitchen to listen to it explain why it had come here in the first place. And it said, quote, "I am the spirit of a person who was once very happy, but have been disturbed and made unhappy. I am the spirit of a person who is buried in the woods nearby, and the grave has been disturbed. My bones disinterred and scattered. I've come to kill John Bell." End quote. So it had a lot to say. This is a real chatty Cathy ghost, and it just gets worse and worse as time goes on. This thing did not like John Bell. Like from the get-go, it said, "I don't like you. I'm gonna fucking kill you." So obviously, this was very alarming to the family. And they all started to wonder, like, why does it want to kill our father? Like, what is going on? Lucy was like, well, is my husband in danger? Now, clearly, because of what the entity said, they were dealing with a spirit who was upset because their bones had been disturbed. Somebody had taken a bone or something from a place that they should not have. And so initially they're thinking, John, what did you do? But it wasn't John who disturbed a grave. There were a lot of people who worked on the land because they had 328 acres of land. So they needed a lot of farm hands. And they also had 9 children. And one day, while they were all out working in the fields, they realized that they were in some kind of burial ground, which they believed was Native American burial ground. And history would actually later prove this. Now, it's unclear what exactly happened because of the 1800s of it all. Different sources say different things, but the most common thing in all of the sources was that they were plowing the fields. So the farmhands, they went and they told John Bell, they were like, "Hey, there's this burial ground over here. That's what we think it is." And Drury, his son, was either there with John when this happened or he was like, listening in. So a little while later, he and his friend were a little bit, they were a little bit bored because it was the 1800s and they were done with their chores for the day. So they went out to the area where the farmhands had been talking about because they wanted to see what a Native American burial ground looks like. And these kids just started digging. They were looking to dig something up. So Drury actually stumbled across in his digging a jawbone and decided, oh, well, this is great. I'm going to take this home and show my daddy. And dad was not proud. Dad was pissed. So he took this jawbone from a Native American burial ground and took it home to show his father, to which John was like, "Go fucking put that back. Like, that is not okay. You can't disturb a grave. What the hell is wrong with you?" Which is, I'm sure, exactly what he said. And being a good son, he did what his father asked him. He was like, "Fine, I'll put it back." So he went and he put the jawbone back where he found it. But this doesn't matter. It has already been disturbed. You've already pissed off the spirits. So now people start hearing of this haunted farm all over the world, not just in Tennessee, not just in the South. Everyone is hearing about this haunted farm. Word has spread throughout the country. And interestingly enough, there was one man who showed up at their house claiming to be a witch hunter. Because remember, it's the 1800s. So, witches. And he claimed that he came out to Tennessee to rescue the family. He was like, hey, what's up? I'm a witch hunter. I got some silver bullets with me. And I know that they'll kill some witches. But to him, it was the same thing. So me hearing this was like, isn't that for werewolves? Like I always thought that that was just a werewolf thing. Silver bullets. Stakes are for vampires. Silver bullets are for werewolves. Fire is for witches. I don't know. Leave witches alone. Okay, leave them alone. But this man was like, look, I'm a professional. I've already done this before. I know what I'm doing. And they really, really loved the fact that he had already like hunted down women with opinions and killed them. So they were like, oh, cool. Come on in and let's murder another woman. And he was like, cool. Here's my silver bullets. What's for dinner? So he stayed for a few days with the family. And weirdly enough, while he was there, the disturbances just stopped. Like they didn't happen at all. And the Bell family was a little bit happy that they weren't happening because they're obviously unsettling. But they were also a little bit annoyed because they needed this person to see what was going on so that he could help them. So they were like, look, we promise there's a lot of activity and we'll pay you to live here. If this is really what you're capable of, then you can stay here. Now, of course, guys, I mean, this is the 1800s. So they just assumed that anything weird, any kind of like unsettling presence, a ghost, had to do with like witchcraft because I don't know, ergot or whatever. And I know that that's not really what caused the witch trials. Like it was just some bored ass kids. But regardless, whatever their reason was for thinking this was a witch, they were like, yeah, you can stay here as our protector. We'll pay you to live here and we will all be best friends. So he's like, yeah, sounds good. I just have to go home and get my witch hunting stuff and then I'll be back. So he did tell the family before he was about to leave that he thought he had, maybe scared the witch off for good with his talk of witch hunting, but he was going to come back anyway. And as he was trying to get on his horse to leave, to head back home, his horse in the story either refused or was unable to move. It would not budge, no matter how hard he tried. Unfortunately, he's whipping the horse and whatnot, but it just wouldn't move. And suddenly, out of nowhere, everyone heard that familiar voice, a disembodied voice calling out, saying, quote, I can make that horse go. Let me get on behind, end quote, which is so bizarre. But in that moment, the horse freaked out. It was bucking, just freaking the fuck out because horses know they can sense it. And it started running around in circles, very, very spooked. And so the man, he was finally able to get on this horse while it was still having a crash out. And apparently it ran off the property with this witch hunter screaming and holding on to the reins. He was like being dragged by the horse and he did not come back. He was like, you know what? Never mind. Handle that witch yourself. And the witch during this time that he was being dragged away was laughing hysterically. Like you could hear the disembodied laughter in the air echoing throughout the farm. And later on, she would continue to laugh about it and talk to the family and tell them how funny this was. She would even start talking to them in the middle of the night, in the middle of the day, whenever she felt like it. She was really very chatty. And it didn't have to just be in the house or anywhere on the property. She followed them everywhere. And at one point, she told the family that that witch hunter, she had stuck him with brass pins and said he would be spitting them out for months to come. So I guess, I don't know, if you ever needed a reason to not fuck with witches, there you go. That's it. And as we will discover later on, trying to one-up this witch or offending her in any way, even by accident, it's bad news bears. You don't want to do that because she'll come for you. And she started getting really good at mimicking voices of people in the Bell home. So that neighbor we discussed before, James Johnston, He led the church services at the Bell home, and his voice was the first to be mimicked while he was giving his sermons. So this witch would actually repeat sermons that had happened in town away from the Bell home. She would be able to say them word for word, especially when James was around. She loved to do this. And then when he was speaking, she would start speaking with him, like in cadence with him, talking at the same time. And this terrified him. There was another occasion when there was some kind of like a nighttime church service, and a preacher was there to give a sermon that he'd given earlier that day, miles and miles away. And the voice of this witch recited the service that the preacher had given earlier that same day. So this is now causing everyone to be very concerned that this is some kind of like demonic force. And when asked, because remember, this witch liked to communicate with people. And when asked how she knew, she said, I was there when you delivered it. Like I was at the church. And you guys, this happened to multiple preachers in the area. Another preacher was there to give a different sermon one day. He had already given that same sermon that day. It was very common for preachers. And when he began, this witch started giving it for him. And he was just completely shocked. He was terrified. He didn't know what to do. And so again, when he asked, how do you know my sermon? She said, I was there when you gave it. So now everyone's very concerned that she can kind of be everywhere at once. And the weird thing about both of those men, those preachers, they had given their sermons at the same time in two separate locations, 13 miles apart. And she was still able to know what both of them were going to say. So, I mean, it's very impressive witchcraft. And soon enough, she started interrupting every single Sunday service. Even at church itself, she would start singing hymns that no one knew and would just interrupt the pastor any chance she could, or would talk over them or give the sermon for them. So now, not only is everybody talking about the Bell House and the log cabin and the haunting there, they're talking about all of Red River and how fucking haunted it is. Because how is this witch everywhere? And why does she know everyone's business? Now, because so many people were talking about this, this is where our little presidential cameo comes in. Because one of the most notorious visits to the Bell farm came from the would-be president, Andrew Jackson, when he was General Jackson. So the family apparently knew him because John Jr. had served alongside him during the Battle of New Orleans. And General Jackson's party came from Nashville with a big wagon loaded with a tent and provisions. And they were just, going to have fun investigating the Bell Witch. They'd heard about what was going on and they showed up ready to investigate. So Jackson actually brought a self-proclaimed witch hunter. I don't know where they're getting all these witch hunters. That was like, I guess, a job back then. But he brought this man on the trip. And the guy came with a loaded gun, which had silver bullets again. And on their way to the farm, they're on this wagon being pulled by horses. The group's wagon just abruptly stopped and it got stuck in some mud. And no matter what they did, no matter how hard they pulled, they could not get this wagon to move. They would take the wheels off and put them back on, and they would just spin, kind of almost like they were lifting up, but not moving. So then all the men, they were, a little freaked out, and they all got out to push the wagon, but it wouldn't budge. So Andrew Jackson told all the men that he was traveling with that it must be the witch. He was like, this has to be the Bell Witch because nothing else explains why the wagon's not moving. And right as he was talking, that same disembodied feminine voice started speaking over all of them. And it said, quote, all right, General, let the wagon move. I'll see you tonight, end quote. So she was like, all right, I guess I'm done messing with you guys. Go ahead and let the wagon move. See you later. So they were like, what the fuck just happened? And their wagon started moving again. She finally stopped messing with them. And later on that night, the group finally got the wagon going and they got to the farm. So immediately upon arrival, they wanted to go search around and, try to look for any definitive proof of this witch. But they didn't really find anything at first. They stayed up all night into the early morning hours waiting for something, anything. And at one point, they were just sitting in the kitchen when something happened. So the witch hunter that Andrew Jackson had brought with him would not shut up about how good he was at his job. All of his tactics that he had used in the past to murder women. And he was basically just sitting there bragging. And he was very clearly annoying everyone, not just the witch. And Andrew Jackson leaned over to one of the other guys there and said, quote, "I'll bet he's an arrant coward. I do wish the thing would come. I want to see him run," end quote, which is a great quote. Now, I just want to mention, okay, this has never been like confirmed by Andrew Jackson, like historically, but it's all part of the folklore, and this is apparently what he said. Now, at that moment, when all of this was happening, they heard a noise that seemed to be something like sweeping across the floor in front of Andrew Jackson. And in that same exact disembodied feminine voice that they heard earlier, it said, quote, "All right, General, I'm here and I'm ready for business," end quote. And the witch hunter then got freaked out and tried to shoot in the direction of the voice, but the first shot didn't do anything. So the voice tempted him to be like, try a second time, like kind of taunting the witch hunter, like, "Oops, you missed me. Try again." And that attempt failed as well. So at that point, she'd said something suggesting that it was her turn. And this is when the physical violence started again with the Bell Witch. She started beating this witch hunter. And according to sources, he was being dragged across the floor, whipped around all over the kitchen, screaming and yelling. Apparently, she was dragging him around by his nose and saying that she was going to rip it off, which is a choice. That is insane. So she eventually sent him flying out the front door, like she threw him out of the house, and he began running away because he's a little bitch. And apparently, the whole time he was just shouting, "Oh, Lordy." And it is said that Andrew Jackson claimed he would rather fight in the war again than face the Bell Witch. So, yeah, that is the presidential cameo, Andrew Jackson's visit, and that is not where it ends. So, like I said at the top, there was slavery happening during this time, which I hate, don't love that. And another strange encounter happened to one of the enslaved people working on the property. John Bell, as I said, he was very well off with his family. He was pretty wealthy. And at the time, he liked to show off how wealthy he was by like collecting a large number of enslaved people, which is really, really gross. But this particular enslaved person that they had in this encounter was named Dean. So Dean, he and his mother Chloe, they had been actually gifted to John and Lucy on their wedding day from Lucy's father, which is so gross. Like human beings were being gifted to people as fucking wedding presents. That is horrific. It is so fucked up. So, Dean, he was married to a woman named Kate, who was also kept as an enslaved person on a neighboring property. And Dean had actually been known to be a really big target in this haunting that was going on. He would sometimes show up to work bleeding for no reason. And his wife, Kate, would be like, "What the hell happened to you? Like, what is going on?" And Dean would claim that he had been hit over the head by the witch. So now, obviously not wanting her husband to be hurt by this entity, Kate made Dean something called a witch ball. And she made it with different herbs and her own hair from her head. It was like for protection, like a protection spell sort of thing. It was supposed to be an item that would protect Dean from further harm from the Bell Witch. And according to Dean, one night he ran into the witch while walking to Kate's property. He said that the witch appeared in front of him as a large black dog. And she told him that she knew he had a witch ball. She was like, "Hey, I know that witch ball is in your pocket. You need to give it to me." And she demanded over and over that he give her the protective ball that his wife had made. So Dean was very, very scared, and he didn't really know what was going on or what would happen if he didn't. So he did. He handed it over to the witch. He held out his hand, and the ball burst into flames and then shot up into the air. And after that, she kept taunting him, like would not let him leave to just go to Kate's property. So now being further taunted and pushed to his limits by this entity, he pulled out his axe and split the dog's head into two. And then he ran to Kate, who gave him a different witch ball after she consulted with a Native American on what herbs she should put into this one this time to make it even stronger. But then Dean ran into the witch again because she loved to taunt Dean. So because he had split the dog's head in two, she responded by becoming a dog with two heads, and she became even more powerful. And this time, she tried turning him into a mule. A mule, you guys, instead of just taking his witch ball, and he was stuck there. He could not move. And apparently, as this was happening, he heard another voice joking with the original witch's voice, saying that they should ride Dean to have breakfast in hell. What the fuck? So Dean, maybe because of the witch ball he had in his pocket, it's not like specified. He somehow figured out a way to get out of that situation and ran to Kate again, which some say, true love is what prevailed there. There's a whole folklore about how his love for Kate is what got him out of that. And now Dean would tell anybody for years to come his firsthand experience with the Bell Witch. Sometimes staring at screens all day can make your eyes feel like they are actually on fire. And let's face it, in today's world, a lot of what we do requires staring at a screen, which is already horrible for your eyes. I actually went to the eye doctor recently and he was like, wow, I didn't think it was possible, but your vision has gotten worse. Rude, but true. So, of course, he started asking me all the normal questions about headaches and screen time, like I'm a toddler whose parents don't monitor how many episodes of Bluey they consume. And I'm explaining my daily life, lesson planning, entering grades, researching cases, recording episodes, editing episodes, dog videos, more dog videos. And he's like, yeah, you need a new prescription and you should probably invest in some blue light blocker glasses. Now, since I am a contact lens girly and always have been, I did not want to pay the extra price for blue light glasses that I would never wear. So I did what we all do. I went to Amazon. And that's where I found Any Love blue light glasses, which have really helped me on my not wanting my eyes to feel like they're on fire journey. In fact, I'm wearing them right now. So if your eyeballs are also filing a formal complaint and possibly your eye doctor too, head to my link in the show notes and grab yourself some Any Love glasses. They have tons of different styles for men and women. They're honestly super cute and they even come with a nice little case. Save your eyes some stress and go grab a pair or two or five because your eyeballs deserve it. One thing people ask me all the time is how I make my podcast merch, and I always, always, always send them over to Printful. In fact, I've officially partnered with them because they do such an incredible job. Seriously, you guys, they are such a game changer. It's so easy, I could do it. Printful is a print-on-demand site where you design your merch exactly the way you want it, and they create it for you when someone clicks that purchase button. So you're not stuck storing boxes upon boxes of shirts, hats, stickers, or random inventory in your house. The best part is that you can link your Printful creations directly to your very own website. I just design what I want and they take care of the rest. They print it, pack it, and ship it for me. And you can set your own prices. And the merch options, endless. The limit does not exist. We're talking everything from cozy sweaters to phone cases and even adorable pet accessories for your furry little friends. They'll love it. So if you've ever wanted to start a side hustle or just bring a creative idea to life and slap it on a t-shirt or a good old dad hat, this is hands down the easiest way to do it without the stress. Head over to printful.com/a/suspects to let them know I sent you and get that creative juice a-flowing. The link is in the show notes to get started. Again, that's printful.com/a/suspects to let them know I sent you. Because of this, he became kind of like a townie. Like everyone knew Dean. They knew he had survived the witch. They knew his encounters, and people enjoyed hearing his stories. So now, not only the Bell family and the pastors and Andrew Jackson and witch hunters are having experiences, but now Dean is also telling everybody his experiences, which brings us back to the family again because poor Betsy while all of this is going on, is just getting beat up by this witch. So poor little Betsy, she was 12 when everything started. And like I said before, she was getting slapped in the face, thrown around the room, covers being ripped off of her. And she was also being poked by pins all over her body. She said that it felt like this witch was poking her with needles everywhere. Her hair was getting pulled. It was just really, really bad. And she also started to have seizures during this time, and she would go unconscious after clearly struggling to breathe for a very, very long time, only to wake up and suddenly have everything start again. So she would be struggling to breathe, then pass out, and then wake up again, and the whole thing would start all over. And this could last for like up to an hour, they said. So it was very, very bad. So John and Lucy, they were trying everything, everything that they could possibly think of. They sent her away to friends' houses for the night. I think at one point she had been to like 5 different homes, but this entity followed her wherever she went. It was so fixated on her. Now, like I said, this lasted for years. So this did not stop anytime soon. As Betsy was getting older, eventually she became engaged to a childhood friend of theirs named Joshua Gardner. But this entity, for whatever reason, did not like Josh. They were like, no, you're not allowed to marry Joshua Gardner. The voice would follow Betsy and Joshua wherever they went, places on the farm, places in town, just really wherever. And it would say, quote, "Please, Betsy Bell, don't marry Joshua Garner. That would surely bring you a life of pain and misery," end quote. And it would say this to her all the time, over and over. And it would hurt her in front of Joshua. According to Joshua, this thing would hit her and throw her around and abuse her in front of him. And it would say very crude things to make her uncomfortable in front of everybody about their relationship. There was absolutely nothing in my research that could find why the witch wouldn't want Betsy Bell to marry Joshua. But eventually, this got so bad that Betsy called off her engagement to Joshua, believing that the witch was right. And part of that reason was because her father, John Bell, passed away. Yes, John Bell, he eventually died, and Betsy believed that the witch caused his death because she was going to marry Josh. It was all very messed up, very fucked up. So now she's afraid of not listening to this witch. And instead, she ended up calling off the engagement and marrying a man named Richard Powell, who I don't know why the witch was okay with this one, because this happened to be her teacher at one point. I know it was the 1800s, guys. I know people like married their cousins and shit, but this makes me so uncomfortable. Why would the witch want her to not marry a boy her age and go and marry a man who's years older than her? Pretty creepy if he could like marry his student one day, Just real gross. Don't like that at all about this story. But regardless of whether she listened to the witch or not, her life was still miserable. Even though she listened, even though it was like, don't marry Joshua Gardner, she ended up marrying somebody else. It still tormented her. And it is said that this witch cursed Betsy Bell and her husband Richard because Betsy would go on to have 8 children, but only 4 of them would survive. And the other 4 died very, very young. Now, I know this was common back then, but that is a lot. That is a lot of grief, a lot of children for one family. And then 2 more of her children died in or after the war. And she and her husband invested a lot of their money into a ship that was, it cost all their money. And the ship sunk into the bottom of the ocean and they lost their fortune, all of their money, and they never recovered. So Betsy Bell thinks that this witch is the reason all of this happened in her life. And when Richard died, she became a widow and she never ever remarried. She was a widow for the rest of her life, which was more than 30 years. And I would like you guys to remember that from the beginning of this story, the witch said, "I am here to kill John Bell." So Betsy, thinking that this witch, killing her father and causing all this misfortune in her life, and then the farm being on Native American burial ground, I mean, it's all kind of adding up at this point. So let's talk about what happened to John. So this witch always referred to John as Old Jack, except for in that one instance when she said, "I'm here to kill John Bell." She never referred to him as that. She always said Old Jack. And she said that she would kill him slowly. And like I said, eventually John passed. The last walk that John took was with Williams to the hog pen. And along the way, his shoes kept being violently ripped off of his feet and thrown around. And he was becoming more and more frantic and he was very clearly affected by this entity. And by the end of the walk and getting to the hog pen, he was convulsing. So after that, he never left the house again. He was afraid to go anywhere because this witch was targeting him, and he was confined to his bed. And he had been given medication by John Jr., Lil John, who would consult with a family doctor. And one morning, John Sr., he hadn't woken up yet. He wasn't responding to anybody trying to wake him. So everyone was very, very concerned. He was still breathing, but he just, no one was home. So Lil John went to get his medicine, and he was like, maybe, he just needs something. Let me call the doctor. Let me figure out what's going on. And he opened the cupboard and he didn't see his medication. All he saw was this small vial standing where the medicine was supposed to be, and it had a dark liquid in it. And John Jr., Lil John, was like, "What is this?" And no one claimed to have put it there. Everyone said that they'd never seen it before. So when they called the family doctor to check on John Sr., he smelled the vial and he was trying to figure out what liquid it was. And that is when the witch announced to the room that she had given John a dose of it in his sleep, and she had fixed him. So sure enough, when the doctor checked, the smell was on John's breath, the same smell that was in that vial. So this caused the family to become very concerned with what the fuck was in this vial and what she had done to John. And this part is pretty sad. So just like a trigger warning, if you're an animal lover, they decided that they were going to test this liquid on the family cat, one of the family cats. And so they rubbed a little bit on the cat's tongue, and he died immediately. And John Jr., Lil John, was so mad. He slammed the vial down onto the floor. And when it broke, it is said that either a huge purple cloud emitted into the air or a large blue cloud emitted into the air. Depends on which accounts you read. But either way, some kind of weird cloud rose into the air after the vial broke. So John Sr., he had died the next morning. December 20th, 1820 is when he passed. And the witch decided that she was going to be quiet during the funeral. And apparently this is one of the biggest funerals in history at that point. Like everyone knew the Bell family. Everyone attended this funeral. It was humongous. So the witch decided to remain quiet. But when things were wrapping up, she started singing a song, and not like a church hymn. It was like, she sounded like a fucking sailor. You guys, I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but I know this is a funeral, it's a serious situation. But she started singing, "Roll Me Up Some Brandio." And she wouldn't stop until everyone had either gone home or gone inside. She was basically celebrating his death. Now, bizarrely enough, strangely enough, this entity didn't just have a liking for Betsy and, controlling Betsy's life. She also kind of connected with Lucy a little bit, both before and after John had passed. So before John died, Lucy got very sick. She was bedridden, and it seemed like everyone was pretty sure that she was going to die. And they didn't know what she had, but she was very ill. At one point, she was unable to eat. She hadn't eaten in days, and she was surrounded by a couple of visitors who started noticing something falling from the ceiling, and they realized that it was hazelnuts and then grapes. Like, things were just falling from the same place in the house, and the voice of the spirit came out of nowhere and was like, "Lucy, you need to eat these. Lucy, eat those." So for whatever reason, this witch hated John Bell, loved to torment Betsy, loved to torment Dean, loved to torment random people and witch hunters, but also enjoyed, like, taking care of them in certain ways. Like, she didn't want Lucy to die. She wanted her to be okay, which was very confusing for the whole family. But she was able to eat them, and after that, she seemed like she was totally fine. Like, she was cured. This witch helped to cure her. It took a couple of days, but she was, like, back up on her feet. She was fine. It is such a strange part of this story. But when John died, the activity did calm down a little bit, and the witch promised to return in 7 years. She was like, "All right, John's dead. I'm out, but in 7 years, Imma be back." And she didn't really give a reason. So she came and told Lil John, John Bell Jr., some predictions for the world before she left. And you guys, she accurately predicted the Civil War, World War One, World War II, the Great Depression, and she basically warned that the earth was going to end in a great fire. So, I mean, who's to say that she's wrong about that one? I don't know. I'm not going to challenge her. I, I would never. She also said that we would find Atlantis, which was weird. I mean, I would love that, but I think honestly, I'm just not here to question it. Like, I'm not going to question her. Predict what you need to predict and do what you got to do. I am not going to argue with this witch. So this entity, whatever it was, whatever you may think, maybe it's a witch, maybe it's a bunch of ghosts all rolled into one, which we're going to get into in just a minute. Whatever this thing is, was a very, very confusing spirit because it was both mean and nice. It kind of reminds me of the Black Monk of Pontefract, like with the exploding eggs and how it would torment them, but also was like physically harmful. Over the years, many people have tried to solve the mystery of the Bell Witch because everyone is like, what the fuck is going on? So during the years that the family was said to be haunted, the voice claimed to be different people. The voice would change from time to time. Sometimes it would sound like just a random feminine voice. And at other times, it claimed to be somebody named Kate Batts. And there's a reason for this. Kate Batts was a nearby neighbor, and history would actually show her later on that she was a relative of the Bell family. I believe she was Lucy's niece or something, or Lucy's brother's daughter. So, Kate, she was said to have a pretty heated argument with John Bell over land at some point, and she was going to curse him. She was like, "I'm gonna curse you because I want this land." But she denied any involvement in this. She was like, "No, that didn't happen, and I'm not involved in this haunting in any way." But people really believed that it wasn't necessarily the Native American burial grounds, which I think is what happened. They thought it was her because apparently she was, like an outcast in the town. She was a little weird, which aren't we all? Don't they love to blame an outcast? They love to do that. It reminds me of like Bathsheba. It just pisses me off. So she was a very easy target. And because she liked to be the center of attention and people didn't really like her, it was just easy to blame Kate. And eventually the entity leaned into this. It was like, yeah, I'm Kate Batts. Like I'm Kate. And it made the whole situation worse. So people kind of connected that like, oh, well, Kate liked to be the center of attention and Kate was bizarre and this entity likes to be the center of attention and she's bizarre and blah, blah, blah. So they thought it was Kate. And some people have different ideas. Not everyone thinks it's Kate, but a lot of people at the time thought that this was Kate who had cursed the family. However, keep in mind that this witch used multiple voices and got very, very good at mimicking people in the house. She would mimic John's voice, Lucy's voice, Betsy's voice, everyone's voice. Now, some pretty interesting information came about when eventually, in 1993, the farm was bought by Walter and Chris Kirby. So after the 1800s, the Bell family, all of that, the house had actually been demolished for safety reasons in the late 1800s, and it was rebuilt, and you can actually still go visit it, largely because of Walter and Chris Kirby. So before they owned it, a family named the Eden family had owned it. And that is who Chris and Walter bought the farm from. Now, he was a little bit afraid to tell Chris about this, but she was like, you know what? It's all right. I talked to my psychic. Apparently, she had a psychic. And the psychic said that they would get this property and that there was a highly supernatural energy there. Now, Chris had also been told that the energy derived from this place wasn't necessarily because of the Bell's house, and it wasn't even because of the Native American burial ground. It was because of a cave. And if you've ever heard the story of the Bell Witch, you know about the Bell Witch cave. So Walter and Chris, they didn't really think too much about it. They were like, all right, we'll move in. If most of the energy is in the cave, we should be fine. This witch said she isn't going to return for 7 years, then 107 years, and so on. So they didn't waste any time. They moved in, and the haunting started pretty much immediately. They woke up on the first night in the middle of the night to this crashing sound, and they described it as a glass pitcher being shattered on the ground. And of course, they chalked it up to maybe something shifted in the moving boxes because you never want to believe that it's a haunting at first, even if you know you're buying a haunted property. Sometimes logic just takes over. But they looked around, nothing was out of place. And the next morning, Chris remembered that the family who had bought the property from, the Edens, they had kept a journal when they lived there. And everyone, apparently, who had lived in this home had kept a journal even before the Edens. And a lot of the accounts come from William's journal. Remember the son, is it Richard Williams, who went by Williams? His journal is where a lot of the accounts come from. And the Eden family decided to, write a little book about their experiences and leave it for the Kirbys. So Chris picked up the book the next morning to see if she could find anything about that noise. And as she was flipping through the pages, she finally came to this chapter, and it was titled Breaking Glass. And it just clicked for her. She was like, oh my God. And apparently this was a very, very common sound that would be heard throughout the house. And they figured, well, if we're going to be here, if we're going to have a life on the farm, and this is a huge property, we're going to need to make some money. So they decided that they would start giving tours in the cave that was nearby on the property. And this cave was very well known throughout the legend to be the place where the witch retreated to after John Bell had died. And people claimed that it was extremely haunted. People would try and break into it all the time. They actually had to put a fence around it at some point because people were breaking in so much. So they were like, why not make some money off this place? And Chris actually brought her psychic, the one who said that they were going to get this house. She brought the psychic into the cave before they started doing the tours just to see, what they were getting themselves into, if there was really anything there. And because she had been exploring on the property one day, taking pictures, around the area of the cave, she saw orbs and she saw actual people in the photos that she had taken. One photo actually showed a little boy in overalls who the psychic ended up seeing when they entered the cave. So, mind you, this was in the 90s, okay? They're snapping pictures. No one is near the cave. These pictures get developed, and there are people in the pictures near the cave, one being a little boy in overalls. So now Chris's psychic is telling her that this cave was likely some kind of portal because there were so many spirits dwelling in the cave. She was like, there are hundreds of spirits in here, hundreds of them. It is not just the Bell Witch. Of course, that's one of them, but that is not the only one. And she felt like everything that happens on this property is because of this cave. And that is where all the hauntings came from. And the first room in the cave, because yes, there are rooms in this cave, actually has a tomb, you guys, a tomb where a Native American girl was laid to rest. And this is so disrespectful. So this poor girl, she had died of a gunshot wound to the chest in either the early 1700s or the 1800s, but she was later stolen from her tomb in this cave. That's cursed as fuck. You don't go stealing anybody for any reason ever, but Native American, no. Who does that? Who would do that? So now there's all these rooms in the cave that are they're narrow like hallways and larger rooms towards the back of the cave. And then there's a room in the front. They're all lit up now. It's been kind of like remodeled, I guess you could say. And you can go tour it. You can go inside the cave and you can go walk around. Does that necessarily sound like something I want to do? Yes. I would. I would just be very, very careful to not offend anybody and not do anything wrong because apparently these spirits are vengeful. Very, very vengeful. So I would be on my best behavior, extremely careful, wouldn't touch anything, wouldn't pick anything up, wouldn't even, if I did interact, I'd be like, wow, your house is lovely. I am so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. By the way, my name is Taylor. I come in peace. I would just be so respectful the whole time. But you guys, you have to sign a waiver before you go in here. Just FYI, there's a waiver you got to sign, which is terrifying. Now, there was a big, like, paranormal investigator who went to investigate this cave. I mean, obviously, a lot of people go here. Sam and Colby have been here. Like, it's a hot commodity, okay? But this guy, Bob Schott, he was top of the line, best of the best at the time. So he and his team, they had set up in the cave, and while they were there, they experienced some really unusual things, like sudden drops in temperature. And if you've ever been in a cave, you know that it gets cooler. Whoops, I just hit my microphone, sorry. You know that it gets cooler like the further back you go. That's just science. But they were experiencing severe drops in temperature in the same room. And then they were feeling as though there was a presence in the room with them. So they took a photo at the same time as when the temperature felt like it was going down. And there were so many orbs in this picture, so many of them. And then one night they set up like a really high tech video camera with a night vision camera, like an infrared filter. And it captured what looked like a door, just like a random door that appeared out of nowhere. And two human forms walked through the door. And just as quickly as it happened, it disappeared. So multiple people have seen this footage and have absolutely no explanation to what happened. Like paranormal investigators who've probably seen a lot of things, they have no explanation for this. So then came this theory, which if you're familiar with the story, you might know the theory of the portal in the Bell Cave. And this came from a woman named Rosemary Ellen Gooley. She is a famous paranormal expert, and she agreed with Bob that this was a doorway to a portal between the physical world and the paranormal world. And that's where all of these hauntings had been coming from. Like it's an actual doorway to another realm. Obviously, it's still very much tied to Native American burial grounds. There was a fucking tomb that was disturbed there. And then there's also a portal that's said to be in the cave. And this is said to be one of the most wickedly haunted places in America, possibly on Earth, other than what's that castle? God, I always fuck up the name. The castle that's said to be built over the pit of hell. Probably do an episode on that at some point. But this is one of, top tier, real scary. And if you think about it, this makes a lot of sense because if this portal does allow multiple spirits to come through, they're seeing multiple orbs, then this witch being able to mimic all of these different voices, it might not be just one witch mimicking everybody. It might be multiple spirits. And that would also explain how everybody thought that the witch was able to be everywhere all at once because it's not just one entity, it's multiple. But like I said, if you go to this cave, you have to be extremely, extremely careful. And you guys, so listen to this. So Chris and Walter, when they were on the property, they were looking in the smokehouse, like that was on the property. And Chris discovered leg bones, arms, and parts of a skull on the property. And these bones were later determined to be 2,000 to 3,000 years old. And they were identified as a member of the Mississippi Mound Builders tribe. So after, researching more about the cave and the land and everything going on at this farm, she discovered that shamans would do ceremonies to open portals in the cave. So it's believed that the shamans from these tribes made the portal so that they could still connect with their loved ones who had passed on, which is actually pretty beautiful. So Chris and Walter, they had some pretty crazy things happen at this cave. Chris specifically, she said that while she was in this cave giving tours, the most common occurrences during the tours were when people who were non-believers, very skeptical, would end up getting slapped in the face, like physically assaulted if they disrespected the Bell Witch in particular. So there are multiple accounts of people saying that they have been physically held down, like they cannot get up and people are trying to help them up. They can't move. And then people getting slapped across the face if they are being arrogant toward the Bell Witch. Chris even pointed out that anyone who takes something from the cave is basically cursed, which you should never do that anyway. You shouldn't be taking things from places. Maybe like a seashell from the beach is fine, but not from a fucking cave. Leave it alone. Leave it there. Don't unearth things, okay? Stop doing that. So that is more about the cave itself, which is fascinating, and I do kind of want to go to there. But this is the part of the story where I have to kind of tie it back into the beginning. So remember when I discussed, a lot of people tend to glaze over the slavery, but there's also some allegations that are in this story that we're going to touch on right now. It has nothing to do with the enslaved people, but has everything to do with John Bell. And if you've ever seen the movie An American Haunting, I think it was in like 2005, 2006, that movie is very heavily influenced by this opinion. So, like I said at the top, Betsy Bell has never confirmed this. We don't know. These are allegations. But there's a theory out there by a novelist named Brett Monahan. He wrote The Bell Witch in 1977. He believed that because John and Betsy were the ones who it was like really targeting, he believes that John was molesting Betsy. And the book, The Bell Witch, The Truth Exposed, which is the one that I am linking in the show notes, points out, quote, young girls who are being victimized by incest are predisposed to poltergeist activity. And ironically, the victim herself is typically the target of the haunting, end quote. Now, again, that movie, An American Haunting, that's the entirety of the movie. That's like what the whole story is about. Do I believe this? I don't know. Because then that would mean that every single poltergeist story would mean that there's an abuser in the home. I would genuinely hope that that is not true. That is awful. But here's my thing. Okay, here's my issue. So John Bell married Miss Lucy Bell, his wifey, when she was 12. Yeah. And he was 32. I know 1800s and all that fuck shit, but it just makes you wonder. Okay, I'm not saying that he did anything, but it makes you ask a lot of questions. It's not evidence per se, but it's definitely a pattern. And it makes you wonder if that is why the entity did not want John Bell around, if that's why it like slowly wanted to kill him. But then like why would it be so horrible to Betsy? That's the part I don't understand. If you're trying to get rid of the abuser, why are you abusing the abused more? Like I don't get that. It makes no sense to me. Anyways, it's a very interesting theory. And then there's the whole fact that John Bell had been excommunicated by the church at one point. Apparently, he was doing some shady dealings when he lent an enslaved person to a neighbor and was charging the neighbor absurd amounts of taxes for this person that he wanted to trade. So yeah, John was definitely not great. Pretty shady dude. So yeah, guys, that, my spooky friends, is the legendary story of the Bell Witch, aka Kate Batts, aka Chatty Cathy. If you would also want to go to the Bell Witch Cave, let me know because I want to know who else is as crazy as me. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to send it to a spooky friend or share the podcast with a true crime paranormal loving freak just like you and me. And remember to rate the podcast, leave an Apple review, or, comment. And Thank you all again so much for tuning in to our 63rd episode. One whole year of podcasting. We did it. And you know what's impressive, you guys? Today, I barely had to look at my notes. You can probably tell though, it wasn't as structured as I normally am, but I was able to do a lot of this without even referencing my notes. That is how much I love this story. I don't love the other aspects of this story. Don't love the slavery. Don't love John Bell being shady as fuck, but everything else is really interesting. I want to go to the Bell Witch Cave. And I want to know if you do too. And if this was your first time listening, I hope you return this Friday for our Booze Clues segment. Those are our listener stories sent in by you for you to terrify you, or sometimes just give you a good laugh or even a cry. And if listener stories aren't your thing, I mean, that's cool. No shade. They are really good. You guys have some wild stories. But if that's not what you're into, then next week, tune in to hear some true crime. I am planning a very big hitter for us to start off this summer. It is a fan favorite and one of the most requested cases I've gotten. So tune in next week to find out and hope you listen on Friday. And in the meantime, be good humans. Don't take shit from caves. Be nice to witches. And as always, remember to trust your lizard brain. Until next time, goodbye.